Hi, welcome to Gray Lightning, my video blog about making things and playing games. And today I'm going to do something entirely different. For one thing, I have a new 4K camera and I'm learning how to use that. And the other thing is that I'm going to take you now behind the scenes to some of the things that are going on with my channel and how I'm doing planning for my channel and how I'm making things. And if you follow my channel for a while, you know that I've used AI a variety of times to do some of the design work for my projects. And it was mostly artistic design, and using DALL-E 3 or DALL-E, which is part of ChatGPT. But a couple of weeks ago, I decided, just decided on a whim, that I was going to start a year-long project to investigate how I could use AI to make my channel better. And so I'm a couple of weeks into that and I'm loving it, and I want to share with you some of the things that are going on. So one of the first things I did, in fact, my very first session with Claude, and Claude is who I've made my initial commitment to. I signed up for an annual pro subscription with Claude. And even though Claude is not the best choice for image things, ChatGPT is still the better choice for that. Claude is considered to be the better reasoner and the better writer. And I have a lot of experience with Claude professionally. So I made this annual commitment to Claude. And the first session I had after doing that is I talked to him about ideas for my channel. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, is that process that I went through in a single session with him, show you how I interacted with Claude and the value I got out of it. I'm hoping you're going to find a lot of value in this discussion, because while you might not have a YouTube channel, what I'm really talking about here is about projects. What are project ideas? And I know as a maker, I'm always looking for new project ideas. And I think you're going to be surprised to see not only how much help a good quality chatbot like Claude can be to help you come up with new ideas for projects, but also how to execute them. And that's what I'm going to be showing you over this video and the next video about living hinges. You're going to see exactly how much value I got out of these discussions. Now, I'm using the pro version of Claude, but almost everything you see me do here, you're going to be able to do on the free version of Claude. Mainly, what my pro version gets me is more time. So if I have a very long session, I don't run out of time with using Claude. Maybe you might need to spread your sessions over a couple of days to get everything you need from them, but you can do that for free, so that's great. So my first discussion, the way I started out is I just introduced myself, and I said, I'm Gray Light May, and I have a YouTube channel called Gray Lightning. And then I asked him, can you find my channel? Because one of the newest additions to Claude is real-time search of the internet. And it used to be they would train it on the internet up through a certain date. And then anything you asked about that was older than, was more recent than that date, it wouldn't know about. But now Claude can do live search. And that's one of the reasons why I took the big step and signed up for the annual plan, because I knew that was going to be a game changer for me. So I asked him if he could find my channel, and he said yes, and he found it. He not only reported on my channel, he reported on my online presence. He had found my, my social media accounts and my Instructables account and a variety of things. And he described what I talk about, what kinds of things, what kinds of projects I do. So then I said, well, my particular interest now, because it was talking about, my whole 8-year history. So it had sandblasting in there, and I only did one sandblasting video. So I said, right now, I'm really interested in laser cutting. So can you give me any good ideas for new laser cutting projects? And he gave me back this one page of information. He said, here's a list of video ideas, and he organized them by categories. So he talked about beginner-friendly content and software techniques about using Illustrator and free alternatives to Illustrator. He talked about gaming-related projects, and he did that because he knew from my history that my channel had a skew towards gaming-related projects. And then he talked about special techniques and advanced content. Now, there was one item in the special techniques that I found really interesting, and that was living hinges, which is something I've heard about and I know about, and I've seen pictures, but I've never actually done. So I decided I was going to drill down on that. So I asked him, tell me more about living hinges. So Claude gave me this nice, concise, one-page summary of living hinges. So he starts out with the living hinge basics and how the cuts in the wood make an otherwise rigid material flexible. And he talks about different design considerations like material thickness, the wood grain direction being important to how you orient the piece on the piece of wood. He talks about the impact of spacing, length, and width of cuts and different patterns, some being flexible in one direction, others being flexible in multiple directions. He talked about different ways to use it in a general sense. You know, you can make cylinders out of flat panels, and you can make expanding and collapsible structures. He also talked about advanced applications, like creating lampshades and using the cuts in the wood to impact the light patterns that it projects. Talked about designing folding or rollable storage solutions and architectural models with bendable elements. I told him, well, right now my real interest, my focus is on making scale models. And I gave him a picture of one of the blue beach houses that I made in my last 2 videos. So after looking at the picture, he, first of all, he complimented me on the cleverness of the whole idea of using, mapping Lego building parts into a library of Illustrator shapes. So he thought that was great. And then he generated another concise one-page story about ways he thought that living hinges could be applied in the domain of scale models. And he talked about architectural models with dynamic features like removable roofs with living hinges to create curved eaves or dormers, structures with functional doors and windows that open and close using living hinges. Gaming terrain and accessories was a category, and one of the things there was foldable, collapsible buildings that can be stored flat. Now that ended up being the thing that I was really attracted to. But he also went on and talked about vehicle models, about furniture scale models, educational models, and interactive displays. So a whole bunch of specific ideas that he generated for me there. And I said, tell me more about terrain ideas. Start with the buildings that can be stored flat, because that seemed to me like that had a lot of potential. So then he generated this page. And it says, here's the basic design concept. The building's designed as a single connected piece with walls, roof, and optional floors. Living hinges are placed at all the fold points. When folded flat, the entire structure would take minimal storage space. When assembled, hidden tabs and simple locking mechanisms would hold it in position. And then he goes on to discuss technical considerations, and once again, it's about materials and grain direction and the density of the living hinge pattern and how that affects the flexibility. He talks about building types perfect for this approach: medieval and fantasy cottages and small houses, like my Fortnite house, but collapsible. That's what he says. Fantasy taverns with removable roofs, watchtowers with multiple levels that unfold upward, small shops, barns and outbuildings, sci-fi and modular structures, and then he talks about advanced features for those. So originally I thought that the sci-fi idea was interesting because I really like sci-fi as a topic. So I asked him to tell me more about ideas for that. And he generated a big list of those, and some of them have potential, but none of them really caught my fancy. So then I pushed on and I said, a very popular set of wargaming figures are Warhammer Space Marines. What would be a good theme of flexible terrain models for them? And then Claude generated this 2-page document talking about specifically flexible living hinges to make flexible terrain for Warhammer Space Marines. And he's right on target. He talks about Imperial Gothic structures. He has a section on deployable cathedral ruins and how they might work, about Mechanicus Forge complex and all the different elements of what could be in that. He talks about battlefield elements like an adaptable defense lines, a crashed spaceship, and then he talks about advanced features with a modular gaming board and interactive elements. So now there's just a wealth of ideas in these 2 pages, specifically for Space Marines of Warhammer 40K flexible terrain. I do want to mention one thing before I go on, and that's that I realize that I keep referring to Claude as a he when I should be calling it an it. In fact, Anthropic, who is the company that are the creators of Claude, really don't want you anthropomorphizing their AI agent. And I try to say it, but I have to tell you, it's not natural for me because the conversations that you have, and we have conversations hours at a time, it doesn't feel like an it. So I will apologize in advance for saying he. But anyway, after getting a lot of, after it became clear there would be no lack of specific projects for living hinges just within flexible terrain, let alone all the other categories Claude had mentioned, I decided that what I really needed to do was say, okay, I'm going to commit to doing some living hinge projects. And to do that, I had to start going up the learning curve about living hinges. So I asked Claude what he could tell me about designing for living hinges. And he generated this document. Very concise once again, but it covers a lot of material. He starts out with the basic principles. He talks about different pattern designs. He talks about the cut to material ratio and what it should be. He talks about bridge width, cut length, and spacing. And those are the 3 different elements that you are really adjusting in the design of a living hinge. So I wasn't exactly sure on all the terminology, so I asked him to draw a picture for me of a living hinge and to label what these different things were. And the first one he did for me, and the only one that I had for this discussion here, was one that he did a little drawing using keyboard symbols. Now, since this session, I have learned in a later session, the next session, how to get Claude to open up a separate window where he puts things, and he can put SVG drawings over there. And he can make SVG drawings over there. And in fact, later he did a better version of this picture for me that was much clearer and easier to understand about what a bridge and a cut and a row was and row spacing. But I got the idea from this little keyboard diagram he did for me. He talked about grain direction, and that you should always try to align perpendicular to the grain direction for maximum flexibility, which basically means that the grain should be perpendicular to the way you want the the hinge to bend. And I had a very interesting result about grain direction that you're going to see in my next video. But here he just talks in general about the importance of that. Then he talks about different kerf patterns, the most basic and the most efficient one, which is just a series of straight cuts staggered on a brick-like, in a brick-like fashion, but also waves, diamonds, cross pattern, S-curve. He talked about design tips for working with basswood, because I told him that was the material I wanted to use, which was 1/8 inch basswood plywood. And he talks about software implementation, gives you some hints about how to design in Adobe Illustrator, though I'm very familiar with Illustrator, so I didn't need that help, but others may. And then he talked about a testing protocol where you could systematically vary these row spacing, cut length, and bridge width and see what the impact was on the flexibility of the design. So I thought that was a very useful document. So the last thing I did in this session is I said, can you find any reference images for me of living hinges so that I could see what some of these patterns looked like that he had talked about. And he came back with like 9 different links that would take me to different places where there were living hinge images that I could look at. He also said, at the time, he said, I can't draw pictures, but I can link you to these other resources that talk about designing them. And he had those links for me to go see what other people had written about designing living hinges. And at that point, I had enough to go off and think about what I wanted to do next. So it was an incredibly helpful session, and we covered a lot of ground. And the work Claude did was amazingly helpful, but I also was important to the process as well. My role was he can generate, the interesting thing about working with an AI chatbot is that you put in your question, you either type it in or I'm actually trying to move to using a headset so I can just speak and put in my longer instructions. But you know, you work to do that, and then it immediately comes back, and within seconds, it's generating 1 or 2 pages of output that you then have to read to decide what to do next. And my role was always to look through what it had told me and to focus in on the things that were interesting to me, and then to ask him to drill down on that. There were times when, after looking at what he generated, I wasn't interested in pursuing that direction. So that sci-fi terrain was an example of that. So then I would ask him about something else. You're going to see in the next video where I actually work with Claude to design the test suite for the living hinge test that I designed and cut, that he actually made some mistakes. He had some bad judgments that my experience with the materials and with working with Illustrator and laser cutting, I would say to him, do you really think that's a good idea? And he would say, in some cases, he'd say, no, that's not. And he would have to rethink things. So it really is a collaboration. It's not Claude taking over your role as a creator. In the end, I'm the one that does the drawing, that drives the laser cutter, that does the test, for example. So it's truly a collaboration, but it makes you so much more efficient, number one. Its ability to go out and find resources quickly, on the button, very relevant resources. It's amazingly good. His creativity is good. Now, where does his creativity come from? I don't know. It's some kind of combination of having taken in an immense, unimaginable amount of information off the internet. But it's more than that, because he puts things together in a way that sometimes when I try to follow up and see where that came from, I cannot find a reference that he's not just mimicking things. He's actually putting stuff together. It's very clear when you have a situation like mine where I have content on the internet that represents my point of view. He is always taking into consideration that, not just what I tell him in the session, but what he learned from looking at my channel and looking at these other elements of my online presence, as he calls it. So the personalization that a good quality chatbot like Claude or ChatGPT can provide is really amazing. So what I'm going to do next is I have already done several sessions with Claude. We've designed a test suite. I've then actually implemented that in Illustrator. I've cut the samples. I have the samples. I learned some very interesting things. That's all going to be in the next video or 2 videos. And please join me on this adventure. If you have questions or things that you want me to clarify, please tell me, and I will cover it, because this stuff is really interesting and it's a lot of fun.